Support for the Abortion Diary comes from listeners like you. This diary entry was made possible by the generous financial contributions of Elizabeth Castelli. Are you a fan of the podcast and want to help us continue to share our stories? You can support us by becoming a patron on Patreon or making a donation on PayPal. I've been self-funding the podcast for years and need your help to keep it going. Thanks for your support. Abortion happens every day. Millions of people around the world will have an abortion each year. But the majority of those people will never talk about their abortion experiences. What if millions of people broke their silence and told the truth about their lives and their choices? This is Melissa Madera in Santo Domingo, República Dominicana, and you're listening to the Abortion Diary podcast. These are the stories we share.
So my story, my abortion story, thinking about what it would be like to talk about it, there's this sense of what part of it am I interested in telling, and not like there would be parts that I would leave out or things that I would say or not say, but my abortion happened at a time in my life when there was so much going on. And so how to appropriately contextualize the process and what it meant to me and what it was, but then also kind of as a advocate and as a woman who loves women and women's rights and women's issues, and as someone who spends so much time advocating for the birth community and the choice community, I kind of have this interest in what my experience was like as somebody who's looking at other women going through it and how to kind of better the experience. And so I don't know if that was because it was easier to go through it with an academic kind of approach as I was sitting there in the clinic, and as if my brain went there because it was easier to deal with, or if it was just an interest. I'm not sure. But there just seemed to be many layers to my story, and I don't know, it's kind of hard to talk about which layer kind of is relevant, but I guess we'll just work through it and see what comes up. I was 33 or 32 when I had my abortion, and it was a very, 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 very difficult decision because I want another child so badly. I have a daughter, and I had a very traumatic birth with her, and then I had a second pregnancy when she was 2 or when she was 3, and had a very, very traumatic miscarriage, a late miscarriage. And then I got divorced, but have wanted more children badly, ever since I had my daughter, for lots of reasons. One, because I would love to experience it again. I would love to grow my family, but I also would love to have the opportunity to restructure or kind of relay memories about my birth. I would love to, knowing what I know now about doulas and about the birth community, I would love to have another birth to kind of rewrite the experience. And a lot of women that have traumatic births like to talk about, they want to have a birth that they didn't have the first time. And so I really was looking forward to having more children. And so I was in a long-term relationship. After I got divorced, I was in a long-term relationship, and we had discussed having children. We were both very excited about it, and had decided to not try, but not try, and kind of see what that meant and where that would go. And so I became pregnant, which was exciting, except it was at a time when the relationship that I was in was beginning to become very unstable and unhealthy. And I realized that it wasn't something that I was going to be able to stay in, and it wasn't safe for my daughter or for myself. And so right at that time, I found out that I was pregnant. And so it was just a very hard reality to be facing. Like, seriously, like, now I get pregnant now when things are not going in a good direction. And I have had a difficult experience with my daughter's father. He and I got divorced. We were together since high school. We were together for so long, and we've been divorced at the time for 3 years. And the co-parenting relationship was not going well. And with the divorce and just the custody and the dynamics of what it was like to co-parent and what it was like to have someone who you weren't in a healthy, active relationship with trying to manage a child, I was still dealing with some incredible difficulties. And so the idea that I would have a second child with another man who would be very difficult from a custody perspective, the idea of having to deal with that and to inflict that on my daughter and to inflict that on myself was just incredibly difficult. And it was a shock too that the relationship had not worked out in a way that I had hoped it would. And so I decided that it wasn't the right time to have another child that I wanted so badly. And I was still reeling from my miscarriage, and I had, doubts about whether or not the pregnancy would even come to fruition, whether I would have a healthy pregnancy or a healthy childbirth, because the miscarriage was such a shock and it was so difficult to deal with. And so facing the possibility of dealing with another miscarriage and having another really toxic co-parenting relationship and having all of that happen at the same time just felt like it wasn't time. And so I was 4 weeks pregnant. It was very, very early. I found out immediately, and I made the decision that it wasn't the right time. And so I said, baby, now's not the time. So I'll get you back at a point, like you and I will do this again at some point. But right now it's just not the time. And so I figured, having not really dealt with, I was peripherally involved with choice politics in Alabama, but didn't have the sense that I knew there was a mandatory waiting period, and I knew that there was a cutoff for, and there weren't amazing facilities, but there was a clinic in Birmingham. And so I called them and, asked what the procedure was and how the process went. And, it was determined based upon the time you are in your pregnancy. And so they said, you're very early, and you can do a medication termination. Or if you would like, you could have the other procedure done. It's up to you. But they said you have to come in, and we have to do a counseling appointment with you and a description, and then you have to wait 7 days, and then you have to come back for the procedure. And I just was so frustrated and upset that existed, because I had to drive to Birmingham, which is a little bit far from my home, but also I have a 7-year-old daughter who I'm in school with, and I work full time, single mom, and it's a difficult thing. Now, I know that some women don't have access to it at all, and so I felt like a mandatory waiting period is fine as well. But the mandatory waiting period didn't change my mind about what I felt was right for my family. And so that was the part that was so difficult, is what a silly hoop to jump through for something that, in my case, and I think women make the decision and it's made. I don't necessarily know that, you're pacing and, a 1 week mandatory, or if they show, all of the laws that they have in place now where they make you listen to the heartbeat, or they make you see the sonogram and all of that. And so it was just really, it felt incredibly demoralizing that, in some way, some politician somewhere was going to put something in place to convince me that they knew what was best for my family, or they knew what was best for my child, or my partnerships, or And so going through the whole process and hitting all of these milestones, or roadblocks, I guess, rather, where you have to wait the mandatory, week. And then when you get there to the clinic, they make you look at the sonogram. And it was just this constant message that, women don't know what they're doing. Women don't know what they think and what they want. And, oh, sweet little ladies, you should really think about this because you're doing something, are you sure? And it was just so, just the opposite of empowering, the opposite of what I feel like the decision was for me. It was the hardest decision that I've ever had to make, but it was also the bravest decision that I feel like I've ever made. And it is and remains to this day, as a mother, one of the decisions that I'm the most proud of. Because I was a mother in that moment when I understood and realized that for myself and for my living daughter, for this child, that it wasn't gonna work. And I think that even women that don't have children, that go for that decide to terminate a pregnancy, I think that is the best decision they can make as moms. And so all of the messaging that you get along the way tells you the opposite of that, and that's wrong. I think that's wrong. So I called and made an appointment. I had to go to Birmingham because where I live, the clinic here in town didn't take insurance. And so it was, my insurance fortunately does cover the procedure, but the Planned Parenthood in Birmingham was the only place that accepted insurance and went through the process. So went to Birmingham, did my counseling appointment, which was fine. I walked through the protesters at the clinic and the people that were standing outside with the signs, and it was fine. I feel like having a child and being a mother is what gave me the additional courage to understand that my choice was the right one. Because I just imagine that people without children don't really know what they're getting into. Before I had my daughter, I had no idea what it was like being a mom or having kids, obviously. And so I was just even more sure that if it was something I wasn't ready to take on, and it was something that was not going to be good for my family. And so I didn't have an issue with the protesters or with the facility, or that wasn't uncomfortable for me at all. So I went in and did my counseling, and where they taught you about the procedure and when to come back, and they make your second appointment. And then I went out. When I was done, it was very simple, the initial part, you do the paperwork and sign everything. And then I went out and spent about an hour and a half talking to the protesters. And I sat down, there were these 5 women that were there. They were all older Caucasian women who had signs that, said, don't do it, and you're a murderer, and these sorts of things. And they were affiliated with a local church, a local religious organization, a Christian, what I believe are fundamentalists out there doing that work. And I just asked them, I said, why? Why is your time and effort and money spent in this space? And I asked them, I said, how much money does your church donate to women who decide to keep their babies and decide to go through with the pregnancy? How much money do you donate to them for the care and feeding of their child? You're out here and you're pressuring and you're trying to coerce women into not terminating a pregnancy. Well, if you're successful and they do that, what do you offer them then? Do you offer housing? Do you offer food? Do you offer any support at all? And they just said no. So I spent about an hour and a half really speaking with and kind of railing into the protesters to say, I understand how you feel and that you believe that pregnancy shouldn't be terminated. And so instead of just coming out here yelling at women that are in traumatic and tragic moments in their lives, or dealing with something that's hard or difficult, or they're in a place where they're incredibly proud of themselves that they've made a really strong and tough decision, why don't you and your church work hard to support the women that make the choices that you believe they should make? And they just had nothing to say, and they had nothing to, they were angry, and they just wanted to shame people and shame women. And so but it felt good to engage them as an older woman who was experiencing just abortion culture at a time when I wasn't hiding and running from the protesters. I felt it just meant something to me to stand in solidarity to the women that didn't have the ability or the knowledge or the confidence or the I guess desire to just engage and say, seriously, you're women. You are women. The only people that you are hurting are other women. Why don't you take in a family? Why don't you, are you adopting children? How many adoptions have you facilitated, or how many children have you taken on financial responsibility? And they didn't have anything to say. And so, but it felt good to speak that. So then I came home, I waited my week, and went back to the clinic at a, whatever the appointment time. And there were about 25 women that were there at that time to have a procedure done. So we were all there, and there were multiple, some people had their partners with them, some people were alone, some people had family members or other friends with them. The staff were amazing. They were so kind and compassionate and wonderful. It didn't feel like there was any shame associated with what was happening, which was really great. But we had to wait. We had to wait for 9 hours that day for the practitioner to drive into Birmingham from out of town to perform the procedures or to administer the pills, the medical termination. And so we all sat there for 9 hours and just began talking and sort of, when you're sitting there for 9 hours, we didn't say a lot in the beginning, but after you go through they moved us, we were in a large room, and then they went through and did a demonstration, and I guess whatever the legal mandatory issues were. And then they moved us to a smaller room. They separated the women who were having a medical procedure to the women who were having a medication termination. And so they separated us out. And so when we got into that second room, there was another woman there that had a child, and she said, this would be our third, and my husband just lost his job, and we just can't afford it. We can't do it. And there's another woman who said, I'm a waitress and I can't manage it. There's another woman who said, I just got out of a very abusive relationship, and this child is from that relationship, and I don't want to remain connected to this abuser. Not a single woman was in there and using abortion as birth control. Not a single woman was in there saying, I just don't like condoms, and I just decided, and here I am for like my 10th abortion. Not a single one. Before they separated us out, we were in the large room together, and there was a younger woman who was just crying and crying and crying and crying. And it was odd because we didn't comfort her. We didn't we were all sitting there, all 25 of us, we were sitting there, and we were all at least 2 or 3 chairs apart, and we all just sat there quietly waiting for hours and hours, not talking. And I just thought, what a shame that this time has to be spent away from a community. There weren't any men there, but the idea and the oppressed kind of idea of shame and lack of lack of sharing and lack of openness. And I have regret that. The one thing that I regret about my abortion experience is that I didn't go over there to that young girl and sit next to her and put my arm around her and say, it's okay. Like, it's okay. And say to her, having children is so hard. Being a mom is so hard. And as rewarding and glorious and grateful, as rewarding of an experience and as grateful as I am to be able to mother my daughter, it is so hard. And I think if you're not ready and if you're not excited and on board with doing it, You shouldn't have to. For the baby as well. I mean, everyone talks about it as an unwanted pregnancy, What happens is if you go through with that unwanted pregnancy, you have an unwanted child. And I think parenting is hard enough and growing up is hard enough when you are wanted. And the whole idea that we would force women into doing something that they don't want to do, it's terrible, because we're not forcing men in that same way. Men get to just bail and leave. And yes, there are some legal ramifications, but only if the woman can afford to pursue it. And so there's this tiny little section of, privilege and wealth that has access to making that choice. And everybody else, what happens is the woman gets stuck in a position that's impossible, with no family support, with no money. And I just wish I would have gone over to her and told her that it was okay. I felt nervous that she was having some private moment, and I felt frustrated that we had to kind of all be in a room together and there wasn't privacy like at a regular doctor's visit. Can you imagine if we had to have pap smears together in a big room? We don't. We get privacy, and we get consistency of care with practitioners for every other medical procedure that we have or decision that we make as women. But this is the one thing that it comes with a bucket load of shame, and it's lonely and isolating and terrible. And I just wish I would have gone over there and just comforted her in some way. I wasn't able to overcome the shame of, injecting myself into her experience. But unless you have a sign on that says, "Come talk to me, everything's okay," people don't know. And so I wish that I would have been able to offer her some comfort in that moment. Then when they took us into the other room, or had us go into the smaller room where they separated us to wait, because we were there all day. That means the women were missing work. The women that were there that had hourly jobs had to take the entire day off work and had to, miss those shifts and miss the time with their children and paying caregivers or trying to get childcare in some way. It was just insane. But in the smaller room, when it was half of us in there that had very, very early pregnancies and were doing the medical administration, there was one woman who was just cutting up and funny, and the other mom was in there. And then we did have that moment where we were able to comfort each other and talk about it and go through it. And we just all did share our stories and our experiences in that minute, and had this really neat opportunity to talk about what we thought about it. And every single woman knew many, many other women that have had the procedure. And every single one of those women was shocked that it wasn't this kind of creepy, scary, weird, you go into Planned Parenthood and there's, whatever, spider webs and ghouls and weirdness. They were happy that it felt more like a normal doctor's office or practitioner visit in some ways. So we waited and hung out, and the room that we were in was the room at Planned Parenthood where they do sex education. And so all around us were all of these like posters and plastic genitals and, all of these, there was like a plastic womb with a baby in it. And it was just this kind of storage area classroom where they do other training and education. And so it was just this really kind of funny space to be in. And they had, all the STI and information all around. And it was just really interesting. But I sat there too and spoke with the other mom, and we talked about our kids, and we talked about, what we had going on and how happy we were that, we even had access to safe abortions. Forget about, definitely not convenient, and definitely not, it just wasn't a great process to go through, but we were all just so happy that we had access to it at all. Because Alabama was in the middle of passing additional laws to close the Planned Parenthood facility in Birmingham and things like that. So when the doctor arrived, they were very efficient, and they understood that we had been all sitting there for 9 hours, and several of the women had to leave. Several women had to go, and they couldn't stay because they had other obligations or had to work. And so there were several of the women that didn't receive their medication or didn't get an abortion that day. And so that was terrible. But before the doctor arrived, we went in and we had our sonograms, and the nurse or the sonogram tech that did it was wonderful. And she had a very good understanding of the difficulty that the laws put women under. And so she was compliant 100% with all the laws, but she was also very compassionate. And she was also very, very kind. And so, but you could tell that she was sort of annoyed at the hoops she also had to jump through when she was trying to provide care to women. And the joke that was kind of looming, and the thing that was just so funny, was that there's just a bunch of men trying to legislate how women live, and how the choices they make with their bodies and what they want to do with their families. And everybody kind of got that. And so that was a good, I don't know what they're expecting. I don't know if they're expecting these practitioners, these nurses, and these sonogram techs to just be, shoving the pictures of sonograms in the faces of women and shaming them and being horrible. That wasn't my experience. That didn't happen. And I think that what happens is when you see that law is being passed, as somebody who's considering, reproductive health, you maybe are scared that that's going to happen. And you say, you don't understand that you're going to go into an accepting, loving, wonderful environment to have the procedure done in spite of the laws that are in place. And so you see a law passed, and you think, well, great, I can't deal with being shown a sonogram picture, or I can't deal with hearing a heartbeat. And so I don't want to do it. And then, and so I think that's just such a disservice. It's such a abortion of justice. Can I, if I can call it that, which is, I think, what it is. But the staff were wonderful. The clinic was great. It was clean and it was well run. And then when the doctor came in, she was amazing. She sat down and she went through the information. She was incredibly thorough. And that was in a room with just myself and the practitioner. So she apologized and said that she was so sorry about the wait and the difficulties. And then she explained to us how she couldn't live in Birmingham because the doctors that perform abortion as one of the many, procedures that they perform in their practice, their homes get vandalized, their children get threatened, their cats and dogs get murdered, and the hate mail, they said that it's not safe for their families to live in the town, so they come from out of town in order to prevent that from happening, which is crazy. But wow, the dedication of that doctor to be interested and willing and put herself in that position and come in from out of town. She was thorough and wonderful, gave me the medication and explained the procedure. And then I came home. And was able to experience the termination in my own house medically. It was hard, but it was wonderful to be able to do it at home and to be able to do it, and it's not a particularly complicated procedure. They give you a pill at the clinic, and then you wait 24 hours and take another pill at home, and the procedure is done. And I didn't have any problems or additional medical issues afterwards. We did have to come back in 2 weeks' time to the clinic for a follow-up visit. So to have this done, there was a 3-visit minimum up to the clinic. So I went back 2 weeks later, and all of the women that were with me for the other 2 visits were there as well. And it was like we'd known each other. We just had this bond and this connection, and this, we asked how we were doing, and did you have an okay 2 weeks, and how was this? And we didn't exchange information, and we haven't kept in touch, but it was this wonderful community of women there that were interested in supporting and loving each other at the moment. And so that felt really great. And it was nice and I often wonder what it would be like if I saw one of them out, or, but as time has gone by, I don't know that I would recognize them. But I wish that we could talk about it more. I wish that we could get together, and I wish that mothers told daughters, and that women told each other about it, so that there wasn't the shame and stigma associated with it, so that women could get the help and the support and the love that they need to make one of the of the many very difficult decisions around reproductive health. So, yeah, that's my story.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, that's what happened. That was the process part of the story. And I just feel so lucky. I feel so fortunate and so lucky. And I'm just sitting here in a giant pile of privilege that I even was able to do it, that I was able to take off work, and that I had childcare, and, for the visits, and for the 2-day time when the pregnancy was being terminated. And I'm just so grateful. And I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to tell my story and add to the podcast. So thanks.
Can you tell me a little bit about your experience once you came home and had the medication abortion at home?
Sure. So the initial medication that they give you at the clinic, and I'll never forget this, the woman who was giving us, as we were all in that room together, the woman who was telling us what would happen, she said to us, if you take you'll take the first pill. If you don't take the second pill, you're not going to terminate the pregnancy. But if you do, the minute you swallow it, and she held up her hands like scissors, and she was talking about what the medication does in the stem in the uterus, and she clipped her hands together like scissors, and she said, once you do that, you can't go back. And so I just thought, in a way, also, my gosh, the women who what is that statistic? Who goes home and doesn't take the second pill? And what does that look like? And where's that story? But the physician administers the first pill at the clinic, and then you come home and you have to wait 24 hours, and then you take the second one, and it's with food. And so I took it, and it was a 72-hour period after where I just began to my body was like terminating the pregnancy. And it was over a weekend. I mean, I planned it as such so that it would be over a weekend. And I came home and took a bath, and I began to bleed and had a heavy period for a couple of days. I had what was like a heavy period for 3 or 4 days, and I was tired, and it didn't hurt. I didn't cramp. I just slept. I just came home and slept and bled, and it was relatively uneventful in terms of the medical side or in terms of the physiological experience. So it was, I remember sleeping for 2 days and being tired, and they told us that there might be intense cramps, and they gave us the warning signs of if these XYZ things happen, please come back, and etc. None of that happened. And it was, and then from then on, my periods have been normal, and there hasn't been any, I've not even had an abnormal pap since the procedure. So yeah, it was good. It was good to be at home. It was good to be at home and be able to do it on my own terms. That was nice.
Why did you choose a medication over a surgical abortion?
For two reasons. One, because I was so early. I was only 4 weeks into the pregnancy, and so it was recommended. But two, I told you that I had a very traumatic miscarriage and a very traumatic birth of my daughter. And so the idea of a medical procedure was not attractive to me at all. And so I was very, very happy that there was an option to not have to have another DNC. When I had my miscarriage, it was the day of the tornado. A giant tornado came through Tuscaloosa and destroyed the town, and 100 people lost their lives, and it was horrifying. And I found out that I had lost the baby that morning, and then the tornado hit that afternoon. And so I had to wait for a week and a half to have a DNC. And my OB said to me, your body might abort naturally, so good luck. That might happen. Or, but we don't know when we're going to be able to get you in. The hospitals were packed and the whole town was in complete disarray. And so I had to hang out with my daughter who had died for a week and a half and then go in for the procedure. And it was just so difficult, and it was just so traumatic. And I didn't want to have that experience I didn't want to lay in the bed, and I didn't want to be in stirrups, and I didn't want to be, I didn't want an IV, and I didn't want to have that feeling that I felt when I woke up after my last DNC. And so I didn't want to go through that again. And I wasn't sure if I wasn't sure what I don't know. I didn't, I guess what I'm struggling with is trying to, the experiences are so different to me because I wanted that pregnancy so badly. My daughter that I lost, I wanted that baby. So we were so excited. We were going to have our second child. And the loss of that was devastating. It was devastating. And it didn't feel anything like that when I had my abortion. It didn't feel like a loss. It felt like an empowered decision to do the right thing for myself and my family and for my daughter. And it felt like something that was completely and totally right. I do not have a single moment of wishing I hadn't, of regret, of thinking it was the wrong decision or in some way that I should have chosen differently. It was just hands down 100% the right thing to do. I am still to this day just devastated about the pregnancy that I lost with my second daughter. And it's so hard. And I find it interesting that that's the case. But it's night and day difference between those two experiences. So I chose I didn't want the DNC because I had one that was terrible. And I was so grateful that there was an opportunity for me to terminate the pregnancy without having to go through that again. So yay for medication.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Why do you want to share your story?
I want to talk about what happened because I want to change how it happens. I want to be a part of anything that I can that provides any kind of structure or information or any piece of the conversation about reproductive rights for women. I find it to be insane. The state of affairs in this country right now, all over the world, not just here, but that women don't have reproductive choices in the same way that we have about breast cancer choices or everything else, birth control choices. I find it unbelievable that the pro-life movement wants to remove all legalization of abortion, but they don't prosecute women who miscarry. They don't say, well, you did this wrong or that wrong, or, so it's just such an illogical space. They don't prosecute men who throw their wives down the stairs and terminate a pregnancy, as long as they throw them down the stairs early enough and the baby's not a certain age. Like, it's just so crazy. It's so crazy. It's a choice I should be able to make, that every woman should be able to make. I want my daughter to be able to make that choice when she's older, if she needs to. And so I just want to be part of the conversation that changes the stigma about abortion, that changes the access to abortion, and that changes the realities. I think that women who are considering it don't know even what they're considering. Especially if they don't have children, or if they've never gone with a friend to an abortion clinic to see the procedure. I want doctors to be able to have a full scope OBGYN practice that includes pregnancy termination. You're allowed to do it if your child is sick. You're allowed to do it if the baby has some genetic disease that you're not comfortable with dealing with. But you're not allowed to do it if you are leaving an abusive relationship and are scared that your partner is going to use their biological claim on your child to continue to abuse you and harass and ruin your life. And that doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense, and it's not right. It's not fair. And I would love to be part of changing that.
Do you talk about this experience with people in your life?
I talk about this experience with friends, with women who, I had a wonderful support community of women around me at the time. I have an amazing mom crew, women who have, and almost every single woman that I know who right now who has children my age or a little bit older or a little bit younger, almost every single one of them has terminated a pregnancy. And it's a part of being a woman. It's a part of living in the world. And I think that, so we talk about it a lot. We talk about it a lot amongst ourselves. I don't talk about it openly with, well, I guess I do. I guess in the instances and occasions where there have been men present or where we've been in mixed company or, but I really am not around men who aren't supportive of the choice. But I think the stories are so interesting. I think hearing about them is women that I know, women that I don't know, but it's all kinds of reasons. Women who are trying to achieve certain levels of education, women who have jobs and they're in financial situations and they become pregnant, and either by accident or by, forced, but by being raped or by something terrible. And so we talk about my friends and the women who are in my life, the amazing women who are in my life. We talk about it all the time. Yeah, we do. But like, do people at work know? Is it something that I talk about? No, but I don't talk about my pap smear at work either, or my, my last breast exam, or as openly, as we talk about other stuff.
Did you go to the clinic by yourself? Did you have support?
I had support, but I chose to go by myself. I had lots of women who offered to come with me and said, if you'd like me to go, or but I felt like it was something that I wanted to do on my own. It was important for me to just stay present and to have the experience and to do that. And almost every single woman who offered their support, and every single person in my life who offered their support, had gone through it and done it. And so I felt like I wanted to take a group of young women with me to show them and to kind of see what it was like as an educational opportunity, and as a, bringing the conversation around to women who may be considering it or worried about, a time in their lives when they may have to consider it. But I wasn't at the point. I mean, I was getting out of a very toxic relationship, and I was at the point where I wasn't able to quite go that far with it. And so I just wanted to have a quiet day and go myself. And I, through social media, my friends were on the phone with them the whole way there and back, and they were texting and checking in. And it was just, I had a wonderful just outpour of support from my community and from women who I had shared with that I was going to go have it done. So I didn't have anyone physically with me, but that was a choice as well. So I could have had 20 people that would have come up and sat with me for 9 hours, because that is the amazing group of women that I'm involved with and the amazing community that I have. They would have all done it. They would have done it, and they brought me food after, and they spent that whole weekend checking up on me, and a couple of them stayed here at my home and just said, let me know if you need anything. And so when I was here, there was a great deal of support. But I really wanted to do it on my own, go to the clinic and be there and just kind of meditate and say goodbye, to the potential. I mean, you never know how it was going to turn out with a pregnancy, but just sort of have that minute and kind of spend a day with baby and hang out and just kind of talk through what that was like and what my decisions were, and be in that space where I could just sort of hang out and spend time and say goodbye. So I wanted to do that by myself.
For more information about the Abortion Diary podcast, visit us on the web at theabortiondiary.com or email me at melissam@theabortiondiary.com. If you would like to share your story, visit our website, click on Share Your Abortion Story, and send me a message. Or drop me a line at melissam@theabortiondiary.com. We're trying our best to climb the charts on iTunes, so if you're a fan of the podcast, please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and write us a review. Even if it's not how you listen, you'll help us reach more people. You can also leave a comment on our website or take our listener survey. I love to hear from you. You can also listen to over 160 stories on our website, SoundCloud, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, or your favorite podcast app. If you'd like to support the Abortion Diary, you can make a tax-deductible donation to us on Patreon or PayPal. You can also bring me to your college campus or organization. I use the money generated from that to make more Abortion Diary episodes. And remember to follow us on Twitter at Abortion Diary and like us on Facebook. A special thanks to you for listening. I'm Melissa Madera, and I'll be back next week with a new story.